Hey everyone! Tonight we're venturing into the world of the Persian Empire. An empire so vast it stretched from the shores of the Aegean to the edges of the Indus. We'll meet the visionaries who built the royal road, marveled at their satrap's savvy, and explored the magnificent palaces where power and artistry intertwined. Before you drift off, if you're enjoying this, feel free to tap that like button and subscribe, only if it feels right for you. And in the comments, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is on your end. I love seeing our little bedtime crew gather from every corner of the globe. Now, soften your lighting. Maybe switch on a gentle fan for a soothing hum and snuggle in. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. When the world was very young, untouched by engines and iron, long before cars and airplanes graced the skies, the fertile lands we now call Persia stretched across valleys and rivers, bathed in golden sunlight and painted with wildflowers in spring's gentle breeze. In this ancient era, humble communities of Elamites molded a life in harmony with the earth, listening to the whisper of wind through tamarisk trees and the soft murmur of flowing water over smooth river stones. Each dawn, villagers emerged from simple mud-brick homes to greet the day, their bare feet cushioning on soft, dewy grass as the cool morning air carried the scent of blooming almond and pomegranate blossoms. These early Elamites built small yet sturdy cities along rivers such as the Crackles, where children leaped between reeds at the water's edge, laughter echoing against earthen banks. Farmers guided wooden plows through dark, rich soil, planting rows of barley and emmer wheat that would feed families during harvest festivals and winter months. In the fields, fathers led sheep to graze beside fragrant grasses, while mothers gathered pomegranate and date clusters in woven baskets at dawn's first light, the rich colors of ripe fruit glowing like jewels beneath the rising sun. Within their homes, women ground grain on smooth stone querns, the coarse kernels transforming into fragrant flour for daily bread and porridge. In central courtyards, priests tended sacred fires whose dancing flames illuminated simple altars, offering prayers to gods believed to shape the sun, moon, and seasons. Artisans pressed slender reeds into wet clay, inventing a wedge-shaped script that preserved harvest records, royal decrees, and hymns for future generations. Bronze tools and pottery vessels lay drying in the sun, each piece bearing the careful hand of a craftsman who honored tradition and necessity in equal measure. At night, families huddled around glowing hearths, sharing tales of mountain spirits and river guardians beneath a canopy of stars. Children learned lullabies that named constellations, and elders guided apprentices in woodworking and basketry, their hands shaping tools and weaves with patient precision. Even when distant kings sent envoys to claim tribute, village life continued. Plows turned earth, flocks grazed on verdant hillsides, and voices rose in songs of thanksgiving under the same warm sun that had bathed their ancestors. Seasonal festivals brought color and music to every quarter of the year, when elders taught children to dance around stone pillars and young couples exchanged vows beneath blossoming almond trees. In workshops carved from rock, metalworkers fashioned bronze blades and ornate jewelry, while leatherworkers stitched sturdy sandals, each creation reflecting the Elamites' deep connection to land and lineage. Trade caravans laden with pottery and fragrant spices traversed dusty routes, linking remote villages to bustling market towns, carrying stories and goods across sun-drenched plains. Over time, vast groups of people speaking related Iranian languages slowly drifted down from the rugged mountains and windswept steppes of the north, following herds and waterways toward warmer, greener lands. These newcomers called themselves Aryans, their name carrying the sense of noble or honored one, and they quickly became renowned across the plains for their exceptional skill at horse riding, herding, and swift raids on rival clans. As true nomads, they erected graceful, cone-shaped tents woven from felted wool in the hot months, moving whenever the grass grew sparse, and then fashioned sturdy reed huts with thatched roofs when winter winds scoured the terrain. Their belief in the power of nature ran deep. They saw the sun's blazing orb as a living force, the wide sky as the canopy of the divine, the earth as both mother and provider, and especially fire as the sacred link between mortals and gods. Each twilight, families gathered around a carefully kindled flame, an offering to Ahura Mazda, the fire god, watching embers dance while they whispered prayers for light, warmth, and protection through the long night. Along high ridges and beside rushing streams they built simple shrines of stacked stones, leaving fresh milk or flat loaves of barley bread in gratitude whenever rains fell gently or harvests swelled their granaries. In every tribal gathering, the twin virtues of honor and generosity reigned supreme. A man's spoken promise was as binding as steel, and any traveler arriving at camp was met with food, shelter, and genuine respect. Young children learned the value of these ideals early on, running barefoot through dew-wet grasses alongside spirited foals, grasping miniature bows almost as large as themselves, and seeing how elders treated every guest as a friend of the clan. When night fully descended, they lay beneath a glittering vault of stars, listening to the rich timbre of elders' voices as they sang age-old ballads about the first spark of fire, the triumph of dawn over darkness, and the promise that spring would always return. Mothers often lulled their sons and daughters with soft hymns invoking Ahura, the wise lord whose breath carried the world, or Mitra, the radiant spirit of friendship and oaths. Their words wove images of wind-blown grass seas, of rivers circling distant hills, and of sacred flames that burned forever in hidden mountain caves. These lullabies were more than mere songs. They were living threads linking each child to ancestors who once roamed the same open fields and hallowed heights. Day by day, this life in the bright, boundless landscape sharpened endurance and nurtured steady faith. Even when a distant chieftain or foreign king sent riders to demand tribute, nomadic families simply guided their caravans of horses and sheep to new grazing grounds, adjusted the positions of their tents, and continued their daily rituals. Plowing small plots of land where the soil allowed, gathering wild fruits and herbs, weaving felt cloaks, and sharing tales beside the ever-glowing fire. In every action, whether in war, in song, or in the quiet tending of a flickering flame, they honored the same natural forces that had first beckoned them south, preserving a heritage of resilience, generosity, and gentle reverence for the world around them. Soon these ancient Iranian peoples drifted apart into distinct groups across diverse landscapes, each forging its own customs while preserving shared memory and kinship. In the lofty northern mountains, the Medes carved out sheltered villages nestled among fir and cedar trees. They hewed sturdy beams of oak and pine to fashion steeply pitched roofs over great communal halls, the scent of fresh timber mingling with mountain air. Smoke curled from stone chimneys where hearth fires burned all year, and narrow footpaths wound between terraced gardens of barley and wild herbs clinging to rocky ledges. Far to the south, the Persians claimed the broad, sun-drenched plains, where they constructed high mud-brick walls hardened in the heat and plastered smooth with white clay. Between these walls, they planted orchards of pomegranate, fig, and citrus, rows of trees heavy with fruit that rustled in warm breezes. Irrigation channels ran from distant streams, weaving water through fields of wheat and lentils, while children scampered among low stone cisterns, their laughter echoing against the adobe ramparts. Even farther east, the desert-steeped lands belonged to the Parthians, who tended camel herds across sweeping dunes and scrubland. Their portable felt tents rose like dark silhouettes on the horizon, each framed by the slow sway of grazing camels. Caravans laden with woven textiles, fragrant resins, and rare gemstones threaded ancient trade routes all the way to India and beyond, bringing back silks, spices, and stories of distant courts. Despite these differences, the Medes, Persians, and Parthians understood themselves as branches of one family. Every spring, when almond blossoms swelled and wildflowers carpeted the valleys, they convened at a vast neutral meadow known simply as the Field of Flowers. There, horsemen in woolen cloaks spurred mounts across dew-slick grass in races of breathtaking speed, their hoofbeats drumming a challenge to rival clans. Archers demonstrated their skill on targets carved from wood and bone, while jugglers and acrobats performed feats of balance on wooden stilts, laughter rippling through the crowd. As the sun dipped low, long tables groaned under roasted lambs spitted over embers, platters of sweet rice steamed in leaf-wrapped parcels, and earthen bowls brimmed with honeyed dates and spiced yogurt. Musicians struck bronze drums and strummed lyres carved in the shapes of winged horses, their melodies weaving through the air like fragrant smoke. Poets stood on low platforms, declaiming heroic verses about legendary kings who once united all tribes under a single banner, verses that stirred hearts and strengthened bonds. Children darted between tents, waving wooden swords carved by their fathers, proclaiming mock battles in honor of ancestors. Mothers taught younger siblings lullabies about the first sunrise, while elders exchanged gifts of woven shawls and necklaces of amber. Councils of chiefs conferred in shaded pavilions, sharing tales of pasture rotations and grain yields, agreeing that caring for families and protecting their shared homeland mattered far more than distant crowns. When the festival ended, riders mounted steeds painted with bright ochre patterns and bore messages of goodwill back to each settlement. The Medes returned to their mountain terraces, the Persians to their irrigated orchards, and the Parthians to their shifting camps, but all carried the same promise of unity. In villages, tents, and cities alike, people resumed the steady rhythms of daily life, tending flocks, plowing fields, molding bricks, and weaving cloth. And at every hearth that night, the glow of fire spoke of common heritage, of villages bound by earth and sky, and of tribes that, though scattered, remained one people under the sun. Over many generations, a clear and steady pattern emerged across the Iranian plateau. The land might shift hands between distant empires and powerful kings, but for the people who lived there, the farmers, herders, craftsmen, and storytellers, life remained much the same. Great names came and went. The Medes with their mountain strongholds, the Assyrians with their mighty armies, the Babylonians with their grand cities and lofty ziggurats. These empires often claimed dominion over the region, but most cared only for tribute, taxes, and loyalty, not for changing the daily rhythms of village life. They left elders in place, took what they needed, and moved on. As long as taxes arrived and rebellions stayed quiet, the empires allowed ordinary life to continue untroubled. So the villagers adapted. Fields were plowed in spring, wheat sown with practiced hands, and rows of date palms nurtured in oasis groves. Potters spun their wheels beneath awnings, hands shaping soft clay into bowls and jars that would dry in the sun. Carpenters carved benches, beds, and doors from rich walnut and cedar, each etched with simple patterns passed down through generations. In dusty courtyards, the rhythm of hammers echoed from blacksmiths' shops, while traders packed woven sacks with barley, salt, and copper to send off with caravans. Camels and donkeys moved patiently along ancient routes, their bells jingling as they bore goods across high passes and desert roads. Wheat and olives outbound, turquoise and tin inbound. The calendar was guided not by emperors, but by the changing of the seasons. In the wet season, when clouds rolled over the mountains and swollen rivers filled the gullies, communities gathered to celebrate. Men wrestled on grass mats in friendly contests of strength, their skin oiled and glistening. Musicians played flutes and frame drums, while children ran barefoot through the mud. At night, families lit lamps and gathered in circles, where old women told ghost stories, tales of mountain spirits, lost travelers, and glowing eyes seen near the riverbanks. In the dry season, when the grass turned yellow and the wind blew hot, people laid simple stones beside the roads in memory of the departed. They spoke the names of ancestors aloud and poured water as a sacred act, praying for the return of rain. Year after year, this cycle of life repeated with reassuring steadiness. Snowmelt filled streams in spring, summer brought scorching sun, autumn promised harvest with gold and rust-colored leaves, and winter rains fed the soil anew. Under the clear and endless sky, generation after generation lived by the same patterns, their feet pressing the same earth, their hopes rising with the dawn. But eventually that peace began to shift. A new force stirred, quiet at first, then steadily rising. Among the tribes of the South, one began to grow in strength and ambition. While the Medes had long held power in the northern highlands, a young leader emerged from the Persian plains. Cyrus, the son of a tribal chief. Unlike many who sought conquest through fear, Cyrus had a vision of leadership rooted in unity, respect, and wise planning. From his seat at Pasargadae, he called together a council of elders, scribes, and advisors. Beneath canvas tents and shaded pavilions, they spread maps over stone tables, marking mountain passes, river crossings, and fertile valleys. They debated roads, alliances, and new settlements. Cyrus listened more than he spoke, weighing each opinion carefully. He forged ties with the Medes by marrying a princess of their royal line, securing peace through family rather than bloodshed. His army was a blend of peoples, Median horsemen, Persian infantry, and others, and he treated them as equals, ensuring no tribe felt lesser than another. Craftsmen and engineers from across the land came at his invitation. Masons from the mountains, gardeners from the lowlands, and smiths from the east. Together, they began to build a new city worthy of a new beginning. Pasargadae rose in the southern plains, its marble columns hauled from Median quarries, its gardens laid out in geometric beauty, watered by hidden canals. The city was a symbol of unity, a fusion of traditions, styles, and strengths. At its heart, Cyrus had a tomb planned, not a towering monument, but a graceful, sturdy structure where he hoped to rest one day beneath the sky he had traveled under, among the people he had sought to bring together. This marked the beginning of a new era, one not only of empire, but of vision, in which the quiet strength of the villages, the wisdom of elders, and the skills of many tribes were woven into something greater. For many years, Cyrus allowed the Medes and Persians to live not as rivals, but as partners. In the southern plains and northern highlands, villages intermingled, and customs blended gently over time. If crops wilted under the summer sun and irrigation was needed, people from both tribes stood side by side in the canals, digging, diverting streams, and patching old sluices. They shared tools and passed down knowledge, how to read the soil, when to release the water, which reeds to use for binding canal gates. When traveling merchants arrived from far-off harbors or desert outposts, they were welcomed in both Median camps and Persian towns, offered sweet dates, cool water, and space to rest. Markets echoed with a mix of languages, and barter gave way to something new, trust backed by coin. Gradually, without noise or fanfare, Cyrus gathered quiet strength. He did not march with drums or send out threats. Instead, he minted coins, small circles of bright gold, pressed with the image of his bow and his face. This new currency traveled from one end of the land to the other, making it easier for farmers, traders, and craftsmen to buy and sell. More importantly, it represented stability. People could now pay taxes in a trusted form, pay each other in a shared symbol of value, and save for seasons of hardship. It wasn't just metal. It was a promise that their ruler stood behind order, fairness, and safety. Rather than demanding loyalty through fear, Cyrus proved he was worthy of it. A village elder might tell his neighbors, "If bandits come, the king's men will drive them out." A herder on the plains might note that tax collectors were fewer and fairer than before. Cyrus's reputation spread through stories, not of battles won, but of wrongs righted. His officers rode not only to conquer but to listen, to resolve disputes, and to protect travelers on the road. Over time, even those who had doubted him began to trust that he led not with greed, but with a sense of duty. When Cyrus finally announced to the Median king that he would now rule the land as its protector, not just as a loyal ally, there was no war. The king, older and wiser, understood what had already come to pass. Cyrus had not usurped the throne with violence. He had earned it. He had become a leader not by force, but by guardianship. And so, the old king forgave the slight, perhaps even with a sense of pride, recognizing that the young Persian had become something greater than any one tribe, a steward of many. With that, the Achaemenid Empire was born, and Cyrus was crowned King of Kings, a ruler over many peoples and lands. In the west, the mighty city of Babylon stood, its high walls and famed ziggurats symbols of ancient greatness. The Babylonians had long suffered under the harsh rule of their previous king, and when Cyrus's army approached, many hoped for deliverance. He took the city without battle, ending a long siege not through siege engines, but through open gates and open hands. Upon entering the city, Cyrus did not burn temples or loot treasure. Instead, he walked into the grand shrine of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, and performed a solemn act. He poured oil upon the statue of the god, not in mockery or pride, but in respect. This gesture spoke volumes. It said, "I honor your God as you do." It declared that even as he ruled, he would not erase what others held sacred. The Babylonians took note. Priests were left in peace. Temples remained open. Cyrus issued a royal decree. Every people under his rule would have freedom of worship. No shrine would be closed, no festival banned. From the Euphrates to the mountains, families continued to honor their gods. Farmers sowed barley in the river valleys just as before, their plows cutting the same old furrows, their prayers rising in familiar rhythms. Merchants from Babylon now traveled eastward, carrying fine textiles, ivory carvings, and jeweled ornaments. In return, Persian silver, gleaming and stamped, flowed westward in exchange. The empire thrived not through plunder, but through mutual benefit. With Babylon secure and its people calm, Cyrus set his eyes further outward. To the northwest lay Lydia, a wealthy kingdom ruled by King Croesus, a man famed across the world for his immeasurable riches. Sardis, Lydia's capital, glittered with gold and bustled with commerce. Cyrus marched on it, prepared for resistance, but once again chose a different path. He did not lay waste to the city. Instead, he listened. When Croesus was finally captured, he was not executed, but spared. The old king, wise from years of rule, spoke to Cyrus about life's greatest treasure, not wealth, but happiness. This struck a chord. Cyrus, though victorious, chose mercy. He allowed the Lydians to continue weaving their famous purple cloth and mining their gold from the Pactolus River. He even honored their faith, ensuring that the great temple of Artemis at Ephesus would remain protected. The people of Lydia saw that their lives, their work, and their gods would be safe, and so they accepted Persian rule. Sardis soon buzzed with activity again. Persian traders walked its streets, bargaining for rare dyes, soft wool, and glinting jewelry. In return, they brought goods from the east, dates, spices, and scrolls of knowledge. With each new land he entered, Cyrus set the same pattern: respect local beliefs, administer fair laws, and prepare for hardship. He built storage houses filled with grain for times of famine. He established courts where all could speak and be heard. He did not rule as a stranger, but as someone who recognized the value of every people's customs and strengths. Thus, the Achaemenid Empire expanded not only in size but in spirit. It became a land where many gods were honored, where many tongues were spoken, and where the rhythm of daily life, planting, weaving, worshipping, continued under the watchful eye of a king who ruled with both strength and wisdom. Meanwhile, Cyrus never stopped dreaming bigger. Though he had already united much of the ancient Near East, his ambition was not conquest alone. It was the weaving together of diverse lands under a peaceful order. In the west, he turned toward Egypt, the ancient kingdom of the Nile. Unlike the kings who came with fire and sword, Cyrus arrived with diplomacy and respect. Egypt, weakened by internal divisions, accepted his rule without widespread resistance. Persian banners flew over the temples of the Nile, but the pharaoh's temple builders still carved hieroglyphs in honor of their gods, and sacred rites continued at Karnak and Luxor. In exchange for tribute, grain from the Delta, linen from Thebes, the Persian governors ensured peace and the maintenance of irrigation canals. Priests were consulted, festivals held, and Cyrus ordered that no idol be defiled, no tomb disturbed. In this way, he earned the trust of the Egyptian people, not by replacing their traditions, but by respecting them. Eastward, toward the great land of India, Cyrus's vision extended as well. He reached the edge of the Indus River, where he gazed upon new lands teeming with unfamiliar peoples and customs. Though he chose not to advance further with his armies, he left behind envoys, traders, and a satrap, a Persian official tasked with fostering trade and protecting travelers. Goods such as sandalwood, spices, and fine cloth began to flow westward, while Persian silver and wine traveled east. Even in lands not fully conquered, Cyrus established ties of goodwill, knowing that peace could be built with treaties as surely as with walls. Throughout the vast stretches of his empire, Cyrus invested in the bones that held it together, its roads. He ordered the construction of the Royal Road, a vast artery stretching from the mountains of Persia to the seacoast cities of Asia Minor. Along its length, engineers built sturdy stone bridges over deep gorges and roaring rivers. In deserts, they dug deep wells at oases, creating rest stations for messengers and merchants. Way stations with food, water, and shelter were spaced evenly, so that a rider on horseback could travel hundreds of miles in days rather than weeks. These roads became the veins of empire, carrying news, orders, and trade. When Cyrus died, his body was placed in a tomb at Pasargadae, the city he had founded. The tomb sat on a quiet hill, overlooking groves of date palms, pomegranate trees, and the green symmetry of royal gardens. It was a simple, elegant structure, stone steps leading to a small chamber, where his remains would rest in peace. Its inscription was brief: "I am Cyrus, king of the world, bringer of peace." That humility, rare among kings, drew admiration. In the centuries that followed, travelers and pilgrims came each spring to lay flowers at his grave, whispering prayers not just for victory, but for wisdom like his. After Cyrus came his son, Cambyses II, who inherited not only a throne, but a legacy of tolerance and responsibility. Cambyses, bold and eager, took up the challenge of continuing his father's conquests. He returned to Egypt, this time not as a negotiator but as a conqueror. He was crowned pharaoh by the priests at Memphis and honored with the full rights of Egyptian royalty. But despite his power, Cambyses upheld many of his father's principles. He offered sacrifices at ancient temples, permitted festivals to continue, and gave orders that sacred monuments, such as the Great Sphinx of Giza, remain untouched. Scribes still inked their scrolls in temples, and craftsmen kept shaping statues of the old gods. Cambyses, however, was also ambitious. He dreamed of expanding westward toward Carthage, the great seafaring power across the Mediterranean. Plans were made, ships were prepared, and supply lines charted. But the journey was cut short. Whether by illness, injury, or foul play, Cambyses died on the road back from his campaign, his death shrouded in mystery. His passing left a void, and with it came uncertainty. But the empire had matured. Persian governors in Egypt quickly restored calm, repaired damaged fields along the Nile, and began new irrigation projects. Life resumed its rhythm, and the empire endured. In the power vacuum that followed, a distant cousin named Darius stepped forward. Clever and charismatic, Darius proved to be more than just a temporary caretaker. He became one of the greatest rulers in Persian history. Recognizing that the empire had outgrown its old systems, Darius undertook a massive reorganization. He divided the vast lands into 20 provinces, called satrapies, each managed by a satrap or governor. These satraps were powerful but not unchecked. Darius created a network of royal inspectors, known as the king's eyes and ears, who traveled the provinces in secret, reporting back on justice, taxation, and public order. Darius also brought unity through money. He minted a new, standardized currency, the golden daric and the silver siglos, each bearing the king's image. This allowed trade to flourish. A merchant in Athens could know exactly what a Persian coin was worth in Babylon. From India to Ionia, transactions became smoother, and trust in Persian coinage grew. Road markers were placed along the royal road, telling travelers how far they had come and how far they had to go. Muddy crossings that once bogged down wagons were replaced with strong stone bridges, so goods could move quickly and safely. Beyond roads and coins, Darius beautified the empire's cities. He expanded Susa and Ecbatana, building elegant palaces with gardens, water channels, and bright tiled walls. But his greatest achievement was Persepolis, a city of ceremony and splendor. Built into a terrace against a mountain, it became the heart of the empire's rituals. Skilled workers from every corner of the empire, Persians, Medes, Egyptians, Lydians, Babylonians, Indians, came together to shape its glory. In Persepolis, the spirit of empire lived, not in tyranny, but in unity through diversity. Darius ruled not only as king, but as steward of a shared civilization built on trust, infrastructure, and the belief that many peoples could flourish under one sky. With roads laid and coins minted, the empire of Persia moved like a well-oiled machine. Trade flourished, food moved quickly from field to market, and news traveled swiftly along the royal road. Darius made sure taxes were fair. Each province paid according to its ability, and a farmer in a small village could expect to keep the bulk of his harvest. In return, he gained protection from raiders, good roads for his goods, and peace in his valley. If someone seized land unfairly or mistreated neighbors, royal investigators, called the King's Eyes, would appear quietly, taking notes and listening to all sides. Even a noble with gold rings and guards at his door could be summoned before the court. Under Darius, the law ruled higher than any man. Every free citizen, from the mountains of Media to the deltas of Egypt, had the right to speak a grievance to an official. And while not all complaints ended in justice, the idea that the king could hear them gave people comfort. They were subjects not just of power, but of principle. Darius also understood that empires were not held together by swords alone. He invested in grand but useful projects. One of his finest was the canal in Egypt, which connected the Nile River to the Red Sea. With this link, ships could now sail all the way from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, carrying grain, incense, and even ivory. Ports sprang up along the route, and Persian sailors began to navigate winds and stars. Markets bustled with goods from as far as Arabia and India. To Darius, prosperity was strength. An empire that fed its people and rewarded work was one that would endure. At the heart of Persian life was their deep and enduring faith. Zoroastrianism, the religion passed down from their ancestors, remained a guiding light. Fire was sacred, a symbol of truth and order. In cities and villages alike, fire temples glowed with steady flames. Priests kept the fires alive with sacred woods, whispering prayers to Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord. In every home, a hearth was kept burning, its warmth not only for cooking but also for connecting the family to the eternal flame of the divine. Fire reminded them that even in the darkest hours, light endured. Throughout the year, the empire marked the passage of time with festivals that brought joy to rich and poor alike. At Nowruz, the Persian New Year, people swept out their homes, lit lamps, and prepared festive meals of rice, herbs, and roasted lamb. Eggs were dyed bright colors, symbolizing renewal, and sweet pastries were shared with guests. Friends toasted to the rising sun, and children danced in new clothes. In winter, Yalda marked the longest night. Families gathered together, lighting candles, sharing dried fruits, and telling stories until dawn. Eating red pomegranates and reciting poetry, they welcomed the slow return of daylight. These rituals stitched the vast empire into one living rhythm. Planting in spring, harvesting in autumn, resting and rejoicing at the year's end. Persian culture was not limited to religion or agriculture. It was a tapestry woven from art, music, learning, and craft. In palace halls, artisans carved friezes of winged bulls, blooming lotus flowers, and noble warriors. Their chisels brought stone to life, telling stories of peace and power. In village markets, carpets woven by women's nimble fingers showed scenes of gardens, lions, and mythical heroes. Colors danced across the wool: indigo, scarlet, and gold, bringing warmth to homes and awe to visiting merchants. Music, too, filled the empire's air. At feasts, soft harps and reed flutes played gentle melodies, evoking wind over sand and the hush of twilight rivers. Children were raised with both freedom and duty. In one house, a boy might be learning how to string a bow and hit a target from horseback. In the next, a girl practiced embroidery, weaving silk with care and color. In village schools, teachers recited wise sayings, proverbs, and riddles, while students copied them on wax tablets or clay. Even a stone wears away if water flows long enough, they would chant. Lessons came with rhythm like songs so that knowledge could be passed easily from child to child. Evenings brought the empire together. After days in the fields or shops, families gathered near their ovens, cooking stews rich with lentils, lamb, cumin, and mint. The scent drifted through courtyards as neighbors chatted over warm bread. Grandparents told tales from older times, of Cyrus's fairness, of fire spirits in the mountains, or of clever foxes in parables. Babies were rocked to sleep with lullabies sung in soft voices, words echoing the same hopes shared from Media to Babylon. And when night fell, the stars overhead were the same stars their ancestors had watched, sparkling in silence above a land vast, peaceful, and enduring. Though the Persian Empire stretched across deserts, mountains, and seas, its heart beat with tolerance. Darius understood that ruling meant more than commanding armies. It meant listening. He had his royal proclamations carved not just in Old Persian, but also in Babylonian and Elamite, the major languages of the empire. These trilingual inscriptions stood on cliffs and in city gates so that travelers and villagers alike could read the king's words in their own tongue. One decree even ordered that any subject, from a goat herder in Bactria to a merchant in Babylon, could speak to the king in his native language if the matter was urgent. In courts and temples, interpreters became honored workers, keeping dialogue flowing among dozens of nations. Across the empire, law came in many languages, but justice spoke with a single voice. When the Persian court held festivals, they became miniature worlds. Nobles from far provinces arrived in embroidered cloaks, bringing tokens of their homeland: Greek wine, Egyptian perfumes, Indian spices. At a spring feast recorded by a royal scribe, long tables were set under open pavilions. Guests prayed to their own gods before meals. Persians faced fire altars. Egyptians murmured to the Nile gods. Jews whispered verses of Torah, and Greeks poured wine in libation. Then they dined together. They shared Mesopotamian lamb stew seasoned with barley and mint, Egyptian flatbread baked on hot stones, and Persian saffron rice. As night deepened, poets and storytellers took turns, some reciting verses from Homer's Odyssey, others recounting heroic Persian epics like those of Rustam and Zahak. Musicians played lyres, harps, and drums, blending rhythms from every corner of the empire into one flowing song. The empire, they believed, was like a great household, many rooms, many voices, but one roof under the king. This unity and diversity helped preserve peace. A Lydian vintner could grow grapes on his hillside without fear, and a Persian merchant could sell fine textiles in a Greek harbor without suspicion. These arrangements worked so well that for generations the empire grew not through conquest, but through careful tending. After Darius, his successors Xerxes and the later kings ruled with more caution than ambition. In Persia's cities, they built new gates, reinforced dams, and maintained the massive road network like master gardeners pruning a beloved tree. Cut only what is needed, the proverb warned, or the garden withers. They saw that stability, not conquest, nourished loyalty. Xerxes' I, though remembered in the West for his invasion of Greece, was also a lover of beauty and rhythm. He added new mosaics to Persepolis, scenes of lions, blossoms, and processions, and held festivals with dancers from every province. On the steppes, he organized grand hunting trips, where courtiers watched as he leapt from horseback to spear boars or lions. In his own court he was called the Lion of Persia. Yet in private Xerxes favored calm. Every year at dawn on Nowruz, he rose to greet the sun with priests and farmers alike. At dusk, he listened to soft flute melodies over a simple supper, and at night, torch-bearing guards paced the palace quietly, whispering news of the day's successes. For over 2 centuries, kings followed these same patterns. Artaxerxes I completed the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls, winning thanks from Jewish leaders, yet he also exchanged friendly letters with Greek philosophers and merchants. Darius II and Artaxerxes II saw internal rebellion and civil strife, but even in troubled times, the rituals continued. The festivals of Nowruz and Marigan brought farmers and soldiers together, and fire temples still lit the valleys at night. No Persian king after Darius the Great reshaped the world, but none needed to. Instead, they repaired bridges, widened irrigation canals, and encouraged the teaching of Aramaic, the language of trade and administration. In towns across the empire, scribes taught village boys to write contracts, record harvests, and copy royal edicts. Markets stayed lively, granaries stayed full, and governors remained steady. In every city, Persian gardens still bloomed, symmetrical squares of roses, date palms, and flowing channels that mirrored the ideal of harmony. These gardens were not just for kings. Even provincial officials kept them, visiting each spring to check water levels and hear reports from the farmers. It wasn't strange to see a nobleman standing ankle-deep in mud beside a ditch, asking about rainfall and seed yield. In this way, the empire's strength came not from splendor alone, but from its care for crops, for languages, for faiths, and for the quiet rhythm of life that had gone on long before kings and would go on long after. Persian rule became not an interruption, but a gentle continuation. an empire where change was managed with patience and where people, from Media to Judea, could live their lives under a familiar sky. Gradually, the world around Persia shifted as new winds stirred from the west. Far beyond the empire's borders, across the Aegean Sea in a land of rugged hills and independent city-states, a young Greek prince named Alexander rose from Macedonia. Brilliant, ambitious, and trained by philosophers like Aristotle, Alexander set his eyes on Persia, not as a mere enemy, but as a worthy rival. He marched eastward with a determined army, defeating Persian forces at battles like Issus and Gaugamela. When he entered Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia, he did not plunder it. Instead, he wore Persian robes and sat on the throne once graced by Darius and Cyrus before him. He dined on Persian dishes and walked through halls built by kings long dead. In one banquet room, it is said, Alexander found a feast still laid out as if waiting, a tradition meant for the return of royalty. Laughing, he joined the meal, finding comfort in the customs of those he had come to conquer. But conquest brings both celebration and destruction. In Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persia, the Greek army drank too deeply during a festival. A torch or oil lamp, perhaps placed too close to a royal tapestry, started a fire that spread through the great hall's cedar beams and drapery. By morning, the palace, once adorned with carvings of lotus flowers and kings receiving tribute, lay in charred ruin. Some say Alexander wept when he saw the smoldering stones. Others whisper he ordered it burned in a moment of rage or symbolism. Whether accident or intent, the most splendid palace of Persia was no more. In its ashes, Alexander began to reflect. He journeyed to Pasargadae and stood quietly before the simple tomb of Cyrus the Great. On the stone he carved his own tribute. Here lies Cyrus, who founded this empire. It was a mark of respect, one king saluting another. In the years that followed, Alexander tried to do what no conqueror had done before, unite Greeks and Persians as one people. He married Roxana, a Persian princess, and encouraged his generals to marry into noble Persian families. He kept Persian satraps in office and hosted blended feasts where Macedonian and Persian customs shared the same table. His soldiers, though uneasy with his eastern ways, followed him eastward past the Oxus River and into India. But the journey was long, and Alexander's health faltered. He died young in Babylon, barely 32, leaving behind no clear heir. His generals, loyal to him but not to each other, divided the vast empire like loot from a plundered palace. One general, Seleucus, claimed Persia. As ruler of the Seleucid Empire, he and his successors styled themselves great kings of Persia and adopted many Achaemenid customs. They married Persian women, preserved fire temples, and ruled from cities like Seleucia the Tigris and Antioch. But they also brought Greek architecture. Amphitheaters rose beside Zoroastrian sanctuaries, and gymnasiums sat near Persian marketplaces. In Anatolia and Mesopotamia, local dialects blended Greek with Persian, and merchants carried bilingual tablets to record their deals. Trade thrived. From the eastern highlands, Iranian silks and lapis lazuli traveled west, while Roman glassware, Greek pottery, and Egyptian linen flowed eastward to Susa and Ecbatana. In military garrisons, Greek hoplites stood alongside Persian horse archers. It was a time of mixture, not domination but mingling, when the East and West met and lived under the same sky. Yet this fusion, while rich, did not satisfy all. In the northeast, in the shadow of the Caspian Mountains, new voices stirred. A leader named Arsaces, from the Parnai tribe, emerged with a vision more rooted in the old soil of Persia. Arsaces rallied horsemen from Media, Hyrcania, and beyond, rugged men who lived by the bow and knew the terrain better than any distant Seleucid governor. Instead of tearing down local customs, Arsaces embraced them. He paid homage to Zoroastrian fire temples, allowed local governors to rule their people, and wore the title once held by Cyrus, King of Kings. The Parthians were not builders of stone palaces, but masters of mobility. Their cavalry swept across plains, using a tactic still famous, the Parthian shot, in which a rider fled, twisted backward in full gallop, and loosed an arrow with deadly precision. They fortified key mountain passes and built watchtowers, not for grandeur but for survival. Their power grew not from spectacle, but from loyalty, agility, and the memory of Persia's golden age. To Persians weary of foreign rule, the Parthians felt familiar. They spoke a language that echoed older dialects and governed with restraint rather than pomp. Over the decades, they slowly absorbed lands once held by the Seleucids, Media, Elam, and finally Mesopotamia. The Parthian banner replaced the Greek standard across ancient capitals. And though their court was humbler than Darius's, the spirit of Persia lived on. By 250 BC, the torch of empire had passed not to conquerors from the west, but to lords of the east who remembered the legacy of Cyrus and sought to revive it, not in palaces of gold, but in the quiet strength of tradition. Under the Parthian kings, life in Persia remained surprisingly calm and steady, even after centuries of change. The Great Royal Road, once commissioned by Darius the Great, was still patrolled and maintained. Its packed gravel paths echoed with the hoofbeats of royal couriers racing from Susa to Sardis, clay tablets strapped to their sides. These messengers carried not only royal decrees but also local petitions, tax records, and trade agreements, maintaining the heartbeat of a realm that stretched from the Euphrates to the Hindu Kush. Along the route, caravanserai, inns for traveling merchants, buzzed once more with life. Traders from China, India, and Rome unpacked silks, spices, amber, ivory, and incense. Inside the courtyards, camels rested and haggling voices rose in a dozen tongues. On market tables, silver coins bearing Persian images were exchanged, now inscribed with Parthian words in the local dialect. Although the Parthians ruled loosely with many semi-independent nobles, they protected the routes that mattered and the traditions that anchored the people. In the West, they sometimes clashed with the rising Roman Empire. One of the most famous confrontations came in 53 BC at the Battle of Carrhae, where the Roman general Crassus led a large army into Mesopotamia. Their Parthian horse archers, light and fast, used brilliant tactics. Pretending to retreat, they lured the Romans into the open and then loosed volleys of arrows while galloping backward. Crassus was killed, and thousands of Roman legionaries were captured or scattered. The defeat stunned Rome and proved that Persia, even without a centralized empire like the Achaemenids, could still humble the world's strongest powers. Yet for all their victories, the Parthians sought tribute, not destruction. After battles, they left farms unburned and allowed villagers to return to their homes. They did not raise cities, but instead kept trade flowing. Roman glassware, delicate vases, perfume bottles, and mosaic tiles was sold openly in the bazaars of Ctesiphon. Parthian-bred horses, known for their strength and endurance, were prized in Roman Syria and Anatolia. In peaceful times, these horses were gifts of prestige. In war, they bore armored knights who swept silently across the plains, turning the tide of battle in moments. Peace was often just a pause between feuds, but it was a productive one. Over the centuries, Parthian rule began to fray. Local nobles grew too independent, and the unity that had once held the empire together thinned. Then, around the year 224 AD, a new power rose from within. His name was Ardashir, a local Persian noble from the province of Persis, modern-day Fars. Ambitious and politically skilled, Ardashir quietly gathered support. He reached out to governors tired of Parthian neglect, to priests eager for revival, and to farmers crushed by heavy levies. He promised something older and stronger than Parthian rule, a return to Persian unity and pride. One by one, Ardashir defeated rival satraps in battle, winning allies as he advanced. He was not a plunderer. He reduced taxes on villagers and forgave old debts. When he entered cities, he restored Zoroastrian fire temples and allowed exiles to return. Eventually, he faced the last Parthian king in open battle and won. Ardashir entered Ctesiphon not as a usurper, but as a restorer. At a grand coronation that evoked the memory of Cyrus the Great, he declared himself Shahanshah, King of Kings. Thus began the Sassanid Empire, named for his ancestor Sazan, a Zoroastrian priest revered for wisdom and piety. The Sassanids brought energy and vision. Ardashir and later his son Shapur I believed in centralized rule, a powerful army, and a strong cultural identity. They revived Achaemenid-style governance, standardizing tax collection and building new roads to link remote towns. Shapur I proved both a fearsome general and a shrewd diplomat. He fought the Romans more than once, and in a stunning reversal of fortune, he captured the Roman Emperor Valerian in battle. Unlike earlier kings who might have executed such a prize, Shapur treated Valerian with dignity. He kept him in honorable captivity in Ctesiphon, where the Roman reportedly advised engineers and shared knowledge about imperial administration. It was a rare moment of power and respect. Still, not all battles were fought with swords. Shapur opened markets to Roman traders and encouraged caravans from India and China. The Silk Road thrived. Indian pearls, Chinese silks, African ivory, and Arabian frankincense flowed into Persian cities, where goldsmiths turned them into treasures. Ctesiphon, the Sassanid capital on the Tigris River, swelled into a city of wonder. Its streets buzzed with scholars debating astronomy and ethics, with blacksmiths forging armor and tools, and with families shopping for embroidered robes and painted ceramics. At the heart of the city rose a new palace unlike any before it. The Tak Kasra, or Arch of Ctesiphon, featured a vast barrel vault of baked brick, the largest of its kind. With no wooden beams, it spanned the audience hall in a single sweeping arch, appearing to float above the marble floor. It became a symbol of Sassanid brilliance and ambition, a marriage of old traditions with new engineering. Nearby, gardens bloomed with pomegranates and roses, watered by qanats, underground irrigation channels perfected by Persian builders centuries before. Zoroastrian temples kept eternal fires burning, and families gathered each Nowruz to celebrate spring with sweet pastries, painted eggs, and songs. Under the Sassanids, Persia once again became one of the great powers of the world. And though centuries had passed since Cyrus rode through the plains of Elam, his legacy of empire built not just on conquest but on tolerance, wisdom, and unity, shaped the throne that Ardashir now held. Life in Sassanid Persia combined the modern and the eternal, the pragmatic and the poetic. In the countryside, daily rhythms had barely changed since Cyrus's time. Villages still greeted spring with planting and ended autumn with harvest feasts. Farmers rose at dawn to lead oxen through fields, guided by stars at night and seasonal winds by day. Yet now these same villages sat on routes that stretched halfway across the known world. The Silk Road was not just a fabled path, it was a living artery. Chinese silk, Indian diamonds, Arabian incense, and Roman glass traveled by caravan from oasis to oasis, crossing high passes and desert sands. Persian way stations, guarded, well-stocked and shaded with cypress, offered rest to merchants and their beasts. Traders met over tea to exchange news from Byzantium or Taxila, their ledgers inked carefully on parchment rolls or palm leaf folios. In these towns, life was filled with both tradition and new encounters. Zoroastrian fire temples still glowed atop distant hills, their sacred flames tended by priests who whispered prayers to Ahura Mazda. The fire was never allowed to die, even as centuries passed. At night, the flicker of that same flame danced in blown glass cups made by local artisans, cups designed to catch and magnify the light. Children recited old proverbs and, curiously, were also taught verses from Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, though Ferdowsi himself lived centuries later. These tales, of Rostam and Sorab, of kings just and cruel, were told and retold around clay hearths as if they had always been there. Story and memory mingled so closely in Sassanid Persia that it was often hard to say where history ended and legend began. The turning of the year was marked with Nowruz, the Persian New Year, which had been celebrated since before Darius. Every home and palace prepared a half-seen table. 7 items beginning with the Persian letters: green sprouts for rebirth, garlic for health, vinegar for age and wisdom, apples for beauty, coins for wealth, sumac for the color of sunrise, and a candle for light. In royal halls, kings sat in majesty to greet foreign envoys and local governors, receiving gifts and reading poetry as musicians played. Guests from every province came in ceremonial garb, satraps from Bactria in embroidered robes, priests from Media in white linen, Arab merchants bearing frankincense. The celebration felt timeless, as if Cyrus or Darius might walk in at any moment. Not every Sassanid king was a conqueror. Some, like Khosrow I, called Anushirvan or Immortal Soul, became famous not for their swords but for their minds. Khosrow was known throughout the region for his fairness. He built hospitals open to the poor, set aside funds to feed widows, and enacted laws to protect tenant farmers from unfair landlords. He valued scholarship, hosting Greek philosophers who had fled the Eastern Roman Empire and commissioning Persian translations of classical works. Under his reign, the concept of a Book of Kings was encouraged, a grand history of Persia stretching back to mythic times, an idea that would one day inspire Ferdowsi. He believed a king's power was hollow without justice. In one tale, Khosrow is said to have wept upon hearing a child had gone hungry in a distant village. Others ruled with flair and romance. Bahram V, also known as Bahram Gur, was a king who adored music, poetry, and the chase. Nicknamed for his hunting prowess, he tamed wild onagers and trained cheetahs to ride with him on his expeditions. He surrounded himself with artists, lute players, and wise counselors. One story says he built 7 colored domes, each home to a princess from a different land, and spent a day in each one listening to tales from across the world. Folk legends told of his love for Shiren, a beautiful and clever woman whose wit matched his own. Around campfires and village hearths, people whispered their story for generations, blending history and fable into a single breath. This era saw innovation in agriculture as well. The Sassanids improved on earlier engineering with qanats, ingenious underground tunnels that brought cool mountain water to the valleys below. Dug by hand and measured with precise geometry, these channels could stretch for kilometers underground, allowing crops to flourish even in arid lands. A dry, rocky plain might bloom with vineyards, fig orchards, and pistachio groves after the construction of just one qanat. It was a quiet revolution, less dramatic than a battle, but just as transformative. The land prospered under such care, yet no empire lasts forever. After more than 4 centuries, the Sassanid dynasty began to unravel. Its last king, Yazdijerd III, was a boy when he ascended the throne. He inherited a kingdom exhausted by decades of war with the Byzantine Empire. Provinces lay shattered, treasuries drained, and armies thinned. In this moment of weakness, Arab tribes from the south surged forward, fueled by a new and unifying faith. Yazdijerd fought with determination and even won early skirmishes. But one by one, Persian cities fell. The final blow came in 651 AD, when Yazdijerd was betrayed and killed while seeking refuge. Legend says that as he died, he ordered his royal ring cast into the river, saying it must never fall into foreign hands. It was said the ring would return only when Persia rose again. Despite the fall of the dynasty, the spirit of Persia endured. Local governors continued to manage cities, now under new rulers. Artisans still wove Persian rugs and blue-colored glass, signing their work in the margin with care. In some towns, Zoroastrian fire temples remained lit, their priests guarding traditions as they always had. Elsewhere, people gently adopted the newcomers' beliefs, welcoming change not with rebellion but with reflection, as they had done with the Greeks, the Parthians, and the Romans before. In this way, the fall of the Sassanids was not the end, but a transformation. Persian identity, shaped by thousands of years of wisdom, tolerance, storytelling, and care for the land, passed quietly into a new age. And though the crown was gone, the soul of Persia burned on. Centuries later, a new flowering of Persian identity began. In 1501, a bold and brilliant teenager named Shah Ismail I rose from the misty hills of Azerbaijan and declared a new dynasty, the Safavids. At just 14, Ismail swept across Persia with charisma and conviction, reuniting the fractured lands under a single throne. But his unification was not only military, it was spiritual. Ismail declared Twelver Sharia Islam the state religion, a daring move that set Persia apart from its Sunni neighbors. Though this choice led to initial conflicts, over time it bound many Persians together under a distinct shared faith. Ismail claimed descent from Ali and the Prophet, giving his rule divine legitimacy. He built a shrine in Ardabil to honor his Sufi ancestors and composed poetry under the pen name Qatai, weaving mysticism with kingship. Like Cyrus before him, Ismail used belief and culture, not just conquest, to forge a lasting bond between people and empire. His successors expanded this vision. Persian silk, brocades, and carpets, colored like pomegranate seeds and peacock feathers. Once again journeyed to India, Anatolia, and even the ports of Venice. Diplomats from the Mughal and Ottoman courts rode to meet Persian viziers. In the south, a revitalized Persian navy fought its way into the Persian Gulf, wresting the strategic island of Hormuz from the Portuguese and reopening trade routes. Spices, pearls, and porcelain flowed through Bandar Abbas. Galleons from Holland and England docked side by side with dhows from Oman. Persia had re-entered the global stage not as a forgotten empire, but as a reborn force. Under Shah Abbas the Great, reigned 1588 to 1629, Persia reached a golden age. Abbas moved the capital to Isfahan, a city he transformed into a masterpiece. Isfahan is half the world, people said, and indeed it seemed to glow with a grandeur unmatched. He lined its avenues with trees and irrigation canals, built schools and hospitals, and laid out the majestic Naqsh-e-Jahan Square, one of the largest city squares on earth. There, mosques rose with turquoise domes, their interiors glittering with tiles in floral and geometric perfection. The Shah mosque's echoing halls and slender minarets became symbols of Persian ingenuity, while the Ali Kappu Palace towered over the square, its music hall carved with niches to shape sound like a honeycomb of melody. The bazaars of Isfahan bustled with trade. British merchants arrived with wool. Portuguese captains offered sugar and tobacco. In the vaulted caravanserais, silk from Yazd, saffron from Khorasan, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan changed hands by candlelight. Carpet workshops thrived. Master weavers tied hundreds of knots per square inch, crafting rugs so intricate they seemed to hold the stars. Even as the world grew closer, Persian life held fast to its ancient rhythms. At dusk, under mulberry trees, people read poetry aloud. Now Hafiz and Sadi, their verses exploring love, mortality, and the divine. Families still celebrated Nowruz, setting their tables with colored eggs, sprouted wheat, apples, coins, and candles, each symbol a hope for the new year. In the north, by the Caspian Sea, farmers flooded rice fields in spring, guiding water through stone-cut canals as they had done for centuries. Children played near the canals, catching fish in woven baskets. On the slopes of the Alborz Mountains, shepherds tended flocks to the sound of reed pipes. Persian identity thrived not only in palaces but in orchards, fields, and village courtyards, rooted in continuity, yet touched by change. After the fall of the Safavids, the empire fractured, but its legacy lingered. In the mid-1700s, Nader Shah, a brilliant yet brutal general, seized power and launched dazzling campaigns. He marched eastward, stormed into Delhi, and returned with untold treasures, including the legendary Peacock Throne and the Kohinoor Diamond. Though his reign was brief and often violent, it reminded the world of Persia's might. Later, in the late 1700s, the Qajar dynasty took the throne. They moved the capital to Tehran, then a modest village, and began reshaping it into a royal seat. The Qajar Shahs built mirror-clad halls, where chandeliers caught and scattered light in endless reflections. They held weekly courts for poets, musicians, and scholars, continuing the tradition of kings as patrons of the arts. Though the empire faced internal weakness and foreign pressure, it became a bridge between East and West. By the 1800s, modernity began to creep in. Railways laced the land, linking Tehran to Tabriz and beyond. Telegraphs carried messages faster than any rider, and newspapers printed in elegant Persian script spread news to literate townsfolk. Foreign embassies dotted the capital, and young Persians began studying in Moscow, Paris, and London. Yet in the distant hills and quiet valleys, older ways endured. A weaver in Tabriz still plied her loom with ancestral patterns. A shepherd in Shiraz still sang folk songs to the dawn sky, his voice rising over lavender fields. Life, in much of Persia, remained as it had for centuries. A woven fabric of old and new, of splendor and simplicity, strong enough to hold through every change. In the 20th century, modern Persian rulers carried forward the enduring blend of tradition and innovation. Reza Shah Pahlavi, rising from a military background, aimed to build a strong and modern Iran. He laid railways and highways across the rugged terrain, opening remote villages to the wider country. Factories emerged in cities, producing everything from textiles to steel. Schools were established not just in major cities like Tehran and Mashhad, but also in small provincial towns, where girls and boys alike began to learn math, science, and Persian literature side by side. Yet even as students memorized Newton's laws or studied French grammar, they still recited verses of Hafez and Sa'di, the old and the new in careful harmony. When Muhammad Reza Shah's son, took the throne, the face of Persia grew even more modern. Radios crackled in village courtyards, and black and white televisions brought images of moon landings and soccer games to homes across the plateau. Still, Persian identity remained deeply rooted in culture. National broadcasts often began with the melodic voice of a singer reading a ghazal, a lyric poem of longing or divine love, before transitioning to the evening news. In the capital, Tehran, young women walked briskly to universities in heels and headscarves, carrying physics books in one hand and a bouquet of hyacinths for Nowruz in the other. Persian homes, even in new apartment blocks with elevators and electric stoves, kept their soul. The half-sin table was laid each spring, as always, sabze, green sprouts, for rebirth, seer, garlic, for health, sirka, vinegar, for patience, and a mirror to reflect the New Year's light. Children were tucked into beds with woven quilts, their parents whispering prayers of protection, just as their own grandparents once did in mud-brick homes lit by oil lamps. In bedtime stories, Cyrus and Darius were still remembered, not only as distant kings but as noble ancestors, part of a shared legacy that stretched across millennia. In alleyways, the scent of saffron rice and stewed quince wafted from kitchens. In gardens, nightingales still sang as they had when the first Persian poets compared them to the heart in love. Even as skyscrapers rose and foreign cars crowded the streets, Persian music, played on santers, setters, and tar, echoed from radio sets, tapes, and later CDs. Teenagers danced to global pop, but they still sang along with verses from Gugush or Haida, whose voices carried the melancholy beauty of Persian soul. In all these eras, ancient, medieval, and modern, one truth remained steady: the love Persians held for their land, language, and traditions. Year after year, date palms bore their fruit, and pomegranate blossoms flamed red against the dry hills. Spring arrived not only with flowers, but with hope renewed, the green shoots of Nowruz unchanged by time. On the high plateaus and between the craggy Zagros mountains, the poplar trees still whispered with the same wind that once carried the scent of royal processions. Overhead, the stars still turned in their eternal pattern, shining on shepherds and scholars alike. Even when rulers changed and flags were lowered and raised, the people's lives moved with quieter rhythms. In a mountain village near Lorstan, a grandmother hummed the same lullaby her ancestors sang when Persepolis still had columns. In the desert, a boy led camels by starlight, watching the North Star the way ancient traders once had. The stone reliefs at Persepolis, though chipped and worn by time, still held their majesty, and their symbols lived on in woven carpets, delicate calligraphy, and family crests. This continuity is not loud or boastful. It flows like a gentle stream, meandering but never broken. The story of Persia is not only a tale of kings and wars, but of the people who made bread from clay ovens, prayers from poetry, and beauty from the ordinary. It is told in each quiet act of remembrance, in setting a table, planting a tree, or teaching a child a poem. So now, as you lie down to sleep, and your thoughts wander through these distant and golden ages, remember, the history of Persia is not a closed book, but a song still being sung. It flows onward, through verses, through traditions, through hearts. It has known glory, sorrow, silence, and song, and it whispers even now softly. Dawn will come again, and the Persian people will rise, as always, with gratitude and hope, beneath the stars they have named for 4,000 years.